Hello, I'm Arbitor Ian. I talk about Warhammer on the internet, and often I talk about Warhammer on the internet for IGN. Most of the videos we've done up until now have been about the lore of Warhammer 40,000, answering people's questions about the universe and the setting, but this video is a bit different. If you've been hovering around the outskirts of Warhammer 40k, wondering exactly how to get involved, this video should give you a few pointers. So Warhammer 40,000 is a massive universe. It's been around for almost 40 years at this point, and through that whole time it's been added to and added to and added to by a succession of writers and video game authors and games designers, which makes it a really rich and interesting world, but also one that can be very hard to get into or even to know where to start with. In this video, we're going to make things a bit easier. We're going to go through all of the major genres of Warhammer content and pick 2 or 3 good starting points. Whether you're into the video games, the novels, or the tabletop, there'll be something here that gives you some way into the hobby. Well, we're on IGN, so let's start with the most obvious one, video games. Warhammer has been licensing its universe to make video games for a long time. Since, I think, the early 90s, Warhammer video games have been available on all sorts of different platforms over the years, and right now there are more than ever, from mobile games to AAA console games. But some do stand out as being the obvious good places to start. First choice here should be an obvious one, Space Marine 2. Space Marine 2 is a third-person shooter, and it follows the poster faction of 40k, the Space Marines of the Ultramarines, as they fight their way through one of the main war zones in the lore right now, the Fourth Tyrannic War. The way I describe Space Marine 2 is that it's very much the public face of the Imperium in 40k. It's a game about great big heroes slashing their way through hundreds of enemies. It's like the way the Imperium portrays itself as a video game. And it's really easy and simple to get into. The ask for a newcomer to this world is very simple, right? You control Titus, the lead character of both Space Marine 1 and Space Marine 2. You do not need to have played Space Marine 1 to enjoy Space Marine 2, as you slaughter your way with your giant chainsaw sword through hordes and hordes of Tyranids. The storytelling is simple but rich. There's loads of little extra things and Easter eggs hidden in where you wouldn't expect them, and there's a good slew of different enemies to face over the course of the campaign. It's a good basic starting point for anyone who's familiar with most video games to get into the 40k world. The Ultramarines, the biggest faction in 40k, doing what 40k does most of the time, having a great big fight. Number 1, Space Marine 2. However, I don't think it's the best video game for introducing someone to Warhammer 40k. I think that title, right now at least, goes to Owlcat's fantastic CRPG, Rogue Trader.
Rogue traders, daring explorers who benefit from a unique style of freedom normally unheard of in the Imperium, with means to decide the fate of entire regions of space.
In Warhammer 40k, rogue traders are like roving explorers, people given a charter that allows them to travel anywhere in the Imperium, usually in command of their own ship or flotilla of ships, to explore outside its boundaries, to trade with Xenos races, something most of the Imperium are not allowed to do, and frequently to engage in battle with them. But the format of this is really interesting. It deals with a succession crisis in a dynasty of rogue traders and the various conspiracies and plots that you have to uncover as the crisis unfolds. Because of that, the scope of this game, the sort of breadth of different characters you'll encounter, gives you a much broader introduction to 40k. In this game, you'll be dealing with rogue servitors as much as you'll be trading with Xenos races, as much as you'll be trying to decode the Byzantine politics of the Imperium. And yes, sometimes you also get to fight things. One of the things I really like about Rogue Trader is it gets the sense of humor of 40k. 40k is famed for being grimdark and really, I guess, edgy, but one of the fun things about 40k is it's also really, really silly. It enjoys the silliness of the setting, which I think gives you a much broader intro to what Warhammer is.
Start thinking now about the kind of crew you will assemble. Will you be a staunch follower of the Imperial Creed, or risk more dangerous associations?
And then for my final choice, this was a bit difficult. My immediate thought was to go, right, neither of these games really give you an intro to the game of Warhammer, the thing we would be playing on the tabletop. So my first pick was something simple, Tabletop Simulator, the standard way for Warhammer players who are not in the same room to play a game of Warhammer together. But it does have a really high barrier to entry. There's a lot of setting up to do to make Tabletop Sim work. And also, I think it's about to be replaced. We know that Total War Warhammer 40k is on the horizon. And I think that's going to give people a much more accessible way to get something that has the feel of a tabletop war game at least. So that's my third pick. Total War Warhammer 40,000, a game that I haven't played, no one's played and isn't out yet. But it's number 3. Okay, that's 3 options for video games. Let's move on to, well, the bulk of Warhammer lore really, novels. Games Workshop's publishing imprint is called Black Library, and they have released a staggering number of novels set in Warhammer 40k over the last 25 years or so, many of which, to be honest, do require a bit of prior knowledge, but there are some great ones for beginners, great ones for people who are new to the universe, and there's so many that there's a lot of different styles in here to pick from. Pretty much everything Black Library puts out is available in 2 formats, audiobook or EPUB. It's primarily a digital publisher. However, every novel does get a hardback release and usually a paperback release. Many of them stay in print for a while, so you can still pick up print books if you want. All of these should be available from the Black Library store. The first one I've chosen is the traditional starting point for all Warhammer 40k novels, or at least it has been for the last 20 years or so, Eisenhorn. Eisenhorn is an incredible series of novels by Dan Abnett that charts the adventures, I guess, of an Inquisitor, Gregor Eisenhorn. In 40k, Inquisitors are like rogue special operatives, like secret police, whose job it is to scour the Imperium for signs of heresy or recidivism or rebellion. The 3 Eisenhorn novels, starting with Xenos and then continuing on to Hereticus and Malleus, chart the career of Eisenhorn over about 150 years as he slowly finds the job more and more taxing and the job more and more compromises his own morals. The reason this is such a good intro is partly because it's written to be one. It takes the time to explain what it's talking about. You don't need any prior knowledge, but also it's manageable. A lot of Warhammer novels are about massive battles with casts of 30 or 40 characters. You need to understand the scope of that and maybe understand a lot of the different units they're referring to. With Eisenhorn, it's just more manageable, right? You've got one main character and his little gang of 3 or 4 people, somewhere between a police procedural and a thriller. The book just has really well-drawn characters that it's really easy to like, and it's all told from the first person, so you don't have too many points of view to get involved with. It's just a really good start to the setting. It also goes into something that a lot of the battles and video games don't, which is the context. Why are all these battles being fought? Why is this such a terrible place to live? Eisenhorn has been a standard introduction to 40k for years now for a good reason. If you read through that, you really enjoyed it and you wanted to move onwards from there, the obvious next thing to do would be Ravenor. Ravenor is another trilogy. It follows on from Eisenhorn, and it's about Eisenhorn's former protege who inherits some of his retinue, and it's got a slightly larger cast of characters. It feels a bit more like an ensemble TV show, but it still retains that idea of being essentially a detective novel. But of course, maybe you didn't get into Warhammer for detective novels. Maybe you want Space Marines fighting massive battles. There are a lot of novels that do that. Some require more prior knowledge than others. My recommendation nowadays will probably be Avenging Sun, the first novel in the Dawn of Fire series. Avenging Sun is the opposite sort of book to Eisenhorn. Lots of characters, a huge scope. It takes place in what is the closest to being a main plot line in Warhammer 40k, the Indomitus Crusade, and it takes place just as that crusade gets started. You see a lot of it from the point of view of people who are new to the crusade, people who have been elevated into new positions and are wondering how to cope. Also, while this is a main plot line in 40k, it's also got a bit of a sense of humour. The book has a lovely set of characters. Many of them are quite funny or are put in weird situations. It's got a bit of lightheartedness to counterbalance all those bloody battles. And then finally, we all know that the Imperium are the protagonist of 40k, the humans, but if you want to read a book that isn't about them, my next recommendation is Brutal Kunnin by Mike Brooks. Brutal Kunnin is about orcs. In fact, it's one of the very few books that's told from the perspective of 40k's orcs. Brutal Kunnin has everything you want from an orc book: off that Black Hawk and his mates trying to beat his way to the top of the pile, stupid stunts pulled off by crazy orc technology, a squig called Princess, and a load of hapless Mechanicum who are trying to deal with these crazy orcs everywhere. It's very funny, very silly and really enjoyable, and still is mostly set in a giant battle. If you really like that and you want to stick on the Xenos novel train, the next one I recommend afterwards, bit of a different shift of tone, but is the very recent Voidscarred, also by Mike Brooks. This deals with Eldar Corsairs, which is space elf pirates, fighting orc pirates, which is also lots and lots of fun. Next up, we have animations. Animation in Warhammer is a relatively new thing, and it can be quite hard to access sometimes. Warhammer now makes a load of animated shows, but most of them are behind a paywall. They're something you get if you have a Warhammer Plus subscription, which means they're not very accessible, but thankfully there are a few other ways to view Warhammer animations that exist on the internet. The first one we're going to pick here is probably an obvious one. In fact, it's one the people producing this video absolutely expected me to put in, and I will. Astartes. Astartes is an interesting one, right? Because it started as a fan animation, and then it sort of, I think, got purchased or licensed by Games Workshop. The whole thing's about 12 minutes long, so it's not too much. Astartes covers a single action by the Retributus chapter of Space Marines as they assault a ship belonging to a Chaos cult. It's tense, it's extremely fast-paced, and it's near silent. Apart from sound effects, there is no dialogue and very little explanation, which gives it a really spooky, unknown, action-packed feel, which is very 40k in some ways. It still stands up today. It's a really good, simple way to at least get the idea of what Space Marines are like, and Space Marines are a lot of 40k. In a similar vein, my second choice is something that is relatively available to a lot of people. And They Shall Know No Fear is the 5th episode of the Amazon show Secret Level, an anthology of animations, each based on a different video game franchise. The Warhammer episode continues the story of the lead character from Space Marine 2, Titus, as he's deployed on a new mission, and on the surface of it, again, like Astartes, this is a Space Marine deployment against a Chaos cult, so it has that mix of action and creepiness that's very evocative for Warhammer. Though with this, there's a little bit more explanation and setup. It gives you a lot more to go on as you're first getting into it. Obviously, it also features a character you might know from the video games, and it's available on Amazon, so that's at least, maybe not everyone can get it, but it's at least a lot more accessible. Also, if you do watch it and you're not sure what's going on, I have a whole video that explains it for you. How handy. Those are my first and second choices, mostly because of accessibility, but I am aware that they are basically very similar, right? They are essentially very long video game cutscenes. There's not a lot of world building going on in these. So my third one, unfortunately, is from Warhammer Plus. Warhammer Plus is great, it's just if you're first getting into it, you probably don't have a subscription. Anyway, if you ever do get a subscription, my first port of call would probably be the 3-part animated series, Pariah Nexus. Pariah Nexus tells the story of various Imperial remnants, the survivors of a number of factions, all holding out on a planet that has recently fallen to the Necrons and trying in some way to come together and make a difference. And it gives you a great broad look at how these wars work. Not only do you get a number of different points of view, from the Sisters of Battle to the Salamanders, some Imperial Guardsmen who may or may not really be there, and of course some basic humans, you also get a number of alien points of view. There are a number of Necron characters who all have different motivations. And it deals with things that a lot of Warhammer media doesn't. Remember, these are animations about a war zone. The characters in Pariah Nexus are stressed, they are injured, they are traumatized by what they've been through. It's genuinely probably one of the most complete little introductions to 40k in animated form that you can see, and probably one of the best things on Warhammer Plus. It would be my first choice, but since you have to have a subscription to get it, it's the third choice here. Weirdly, we're saving the original for last, Tabletop 40k. If you actually want to get into Tabletop 40k, well, that can look daunting as hell from the outside. So Tabletop's really interesting. It's where 40k started, and there's a tendency here to immediately launch into talking about gameplay. But one of the interesting things about the tabletop hobby is that gameplay isn't the biggest part of it. The biggest part of the tabletop hobby is actually the building, collecting, and painting of miniatures. That's something everyone involved in tabletop sort of has to do and usually enjoys doing, and it's probably something they spend a lot more time on than they do playing any games with them. However, let's assume you would like to get into playing some tabletop games instead of some video games. How do you go about doing it? There are a lot of different Warhammer tabletop games, but gameplay-wise, they're all sort of turn-based strategy games. Each model or unit in your army has a list of stats that allow it to do certain things and perform various abilities, and you take turns moving them around either a board or a fully modeled battlefield and rolling dice to see what happens when they shoot each other or fight in combat against each other. As I said, there are loads of different formats here. I'll detail 3 popular ones. The obvious first one is just to say standard Warhammer 40,000. Warhammer 40,000 is a game. You play it with an army of models. You'll probably need a copy of the rulebook at some point, and you can get that in one of a number of starter sets, which also come with models and dice. You'll also need a codex book. Those are books that give you the rules for a specific faction. You'll just need the one for the one you're playing. And then, of course, you'll need an army of models. A standard size game of Warhammer 40,000 nowadays is 2,000 points, which can be a lot of models, but there's no rules that say you have to do that. You and your friends can play as big or as small as you like. And my second format here is one that's designed for people getting into the game. All of the big Warhammer games have a starter format. In 40k, the starter format is called Combat Patrol, and it's essentially the pre-built deck of 40k. Combat patrols are small armies, usually 10 to 30 models. That is small, honest. It comes in one box that you can buy off the shelf. The army list is pretty much fixed, and it uses all the main rules of Warhammer 40k. You don't have to learn like a simplified version of the game. You are learning full 40k. You're just learning it in a format that you can play through a lot faster and without the added mental load of having to design your own army from scratch. Combat Patrol is a great way of learning the rules without the stress of a massive army. And of course, if you want to get playing as quickly as possible with the minimum amount of building and painting, Warhammer also has a number of skirmish games. By skirmish games, we usually mean games that have less than or around 10 models a side. A great example is something like Kill Team, a game that involves these special operative teams, each with their own skills that have to achieve a mission, usually on a board game format. Kill Team games are faster and easier to get into, there's less to paint and less to assemble, but to make up for that, the game itself is a lot more complex. Kill Team doesn't use the standard Warhammer rules, it's its own game, which allows for a lot more specialization between all your models and a lot more abilities for them to do. And also, if all this battling is a bit too much, there are also other games you can play. Necromunda is a great example of an almost role-playing style skirmish game. You control a crazy band of misfits in the depths of the Underhive fighting for territory. And there are collaborative games you can play where you only control 1 or 2 characters fighting your way through a mission with your friends. Games like Blackstone Fortress are almost a legacy board game format where you and friends cooperate to work your way through the missions, usually playing against the game itself. And then finally, in tabletop gaming, there are also Warhammer role-playing games. Warhammer role-playing games have been around for ages, but the current ones are published by Cubicle 7. There are essentially 2 choices here. Wrath and Glory is the sort of flagship game where you can play as many of the character-level models from games of 40k. You can assemble a team and go off on missions there. Or, my favourite is Imperium Maledictum. Rather than playing as the famous battlefield characters of 40k, Imperium Maledictum sees you following leads and solving minor crimes in a much more street-level version of 40k. Both of these are great options if your idea of gameplay is more akin to Dungeons & Dragons than a giant real-time strategy game.
There is only war.
So there we go. Hopefully that has provided you with some ways in to the complex and massive world of Warhammer 40,000. Often that's all people need. And of course, if all that reading sounds a bit daunting, well, YouTube lore videos are a whole genre of their own. If you'd like to know more about the Warhammer universe and you don't want to go through all those books, then, well, you can find me over on YouTube at Arbitor Ian. I would be happy to explain it all to you.